In the frozen skies above Moscow in 1942, Soviet engineers achieved the impossible. They made a tank fly. For 2 full minutes, a 7-ton armored vehicle soared through the air beneath a massive glider wing, its tracks dangling uselessly above the Russian steppe. It was the culmination of one man's obsession, an idea so audacious that even the desperate Soviet Union, fighting for its very survival, could barely believe it was real. This is the story of the Antonov A-40, the flying tank that almost changed warfare forever. By the winter of 1941, the Soviet Union was bleeding. Hitler's Wehrmacht had smashed through the frontier defenses, capturing millions of soldiers and advancing to the gates of Moscow itself. Soviet commanders faced a nightmarish problem. Their best forces were encircled, cut off behind enemy lines. Airborne troops could be dropped to support them, but they arrived with nothing heavier than rifles and light machine guns. Against German panzers and fortified positions, they were helpless. The Red Army needed a way to deliver real firepower exactly where it was needed most. Not in days, not in hours, but in minutes. Enter Oleg Konstantinovich Antonov, a brilliant young aircraft designer who had already made his name building gliders. Antonov was not a man who thought in conventional terms. While others saw the limitations, he saw possibility. If you could tow a glider filled with troops, why not tow a glider carrying a tank? The idea sounds absurd. Tanks are designed to be heavy, to crush, and to endure. Aircraft are designed to be light, to climb, and to soar. They are opposites, natural enemies of engineering. But Antonov believed he could marry them. He presented his concept to a skeptical military command in early 1942. They were desperate enough to listen. Stalin's orders were clear: innovate or perish. Find new weapons, find new tactics, find a way to win. Antonov's proposal was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Take a light tank, attach enormous glider wings to it, tow it aloft with a heavy bomber, then cut it loose over the battlefield and let it glide down behind enemy lines. The tank crew would sit inside their vehicle during the entire flight, then detach the wings upon landing and drive straight into combat. The military gave him permission to try. Antonov chose the T-60 light tank as his aerial guinea pig. At just over 6 tons, it was the lightest operational tank in the Soviet arsenal. Armed with a 20mm cannon and a machine gun, it was hardly a juggernaut. But it was mobile, it was available, and crucially, it might actually be light enough to get airborne. The challenge was building wings large enough to lift it. Antonov designed a biplane configuration with a wingspan of 18 meters. That is wider than 3 double-decker buses parked end to end. The wing area totaled over 50 square meters. Massive fabric-covered frames that dwarfed the tiny tank beneath them. The wings attached to a specially designed cradle that gripped the tank's hull. Everything was built from wood and fabric. Steel was far too precious for experiments. The upper wing sat on struts above the tank's turret. The lower wing spread out from the sides like the petals of some enormous mechanical flower. Twin-tail booms extended backward, supporting a large horizontal stabilizer and twin rudders. It looked completely ridiculous, like a child's drawing of a flying machine. But the mathematics said it should work. The test pilot would not sit in an aircraft cockpit. He would sit in the tank driver's seat, peering through vision slits designed for watching enemy infantry trying to pilot a makeshift glider through the sky. The tank commander would operate from the turret, attempting to navigate while surrounded by wooden spars and fabric. If something went wrong at altitude, there would be no parachutes, no escape. They would ride the tank all the way down. 2 men volunteered. Sergei Anokhin would pilot. He was not a trained glider pilot. He was a test pilot, but this would be unlike anything he had ever flown. By September 1942, the A-40 was ready. The modified tank sat on the tarmac outside Moscow, its absurd wings making it look like an insect that had grown far too large for its own good. A Tupolev TB-3 heavy bomber was ready to serve as the tug aircraft. The bomber itself was obsolete, a lumbering giant from the 1930s, but its 4 engines could produce enough power, in theory. They attached a tow cable and began the ground tests. The bomber strained, the tank resisted. Slowly, the massive contraption began to roll. Faster. The wings generated lift. The tank grew lighter on its suspension, and then, impossibly, the nose lifted. The flying tank had left the ground. But there was a problem. The drag was enormous. The TB-3 bomber's engines screamed at maximum power, fighting to maintain altitude. The aircraft was never designed to tow something this heavy, this unaerodynamic. The pilots in the bomber knew immediately they could not maintain the tow for long. At low altitude, perhaps 40 meters above the frozen fields, the bomber crew made the decision. They cut the cable loose. Now Anokhin was alone, sitting in a steel coffin with fabric wings, gliding silently toward the earth. He had no engine, no second chance, just the laws of physics and his nerve. He pulled gently on the controls. The tank responded. It banked, it turned. It was actually genuinely flying. For 2 glorious minutes, the Antonov A-40 proved that the impossible was merely improbable. The tank glided across the Russian countryside, its tracks hanging useless, its wings holding firm. Anokhin lined up his approach, judged his descent, and brought the 7-ton monster down to earth. The landing was hard but survivable. The tank rolled to a stop. Anokhin climbed out, shaken but alive. Behind him, engineers swarmed over the A-40, documenting everything. The test was a success. The flying tank worked. But success in testing is not the same as success in war. The Soviet military command studied the test results with a mixture of amazement and concern. Yes, the tank had flown. Yes, it had landed intact. But the flight had exposed a fatal weakness. The TB-3 bomber could barely tow the A-40 at all. The strain on the engines had been catastrophic. During the test flight, the bomber had been forced to release the tank early, at dangerously low altitude, because it simply could not maintain the tow. And that was under ideal conditions. Light winds, no combat damage, no enemy fighters. Antonov immediately began working on solutions. He proposed using a more powerful tug aircraft. The Petlyakov P-8 heavy bomber perhaps, or even multiple aircraft towing in tandem. He suggested reducing the tank's weight by removing ammunition and fuel, then resupplying it after landing. He was grasping for answers because he knew the core concept was sound. But the Soviet Union was fighting for survival. The Battle of Stalingrad was consuming entire armies. Every bomber was needed for combat missions, not experimental towing duties. Every engineer was needed for conventional weapons production. There was no room for projects that almost worked. The military made their decision in late 1942. The A-40 program was terminated. No further flights would be attempted. The resources would be redirected to conventional gliders that could carry troops and light equipment. The flying tank would remain a curiosity, a footnote, an answer to a question nobody had really asked. But what if the Soviets had not been alone in their aerial ambitions? They were not. On the other side of the world, the Japanese military had their own desperate problems. Island garrisons cut off by American naval superiority. Troops stranded without heavy weapons. And like the Soviets, they had their own radical solution. The Japanese developed the Ku-6, not a flying tank, but a glider designed to carry a small tankette beneath its fuselage. Unlike the Soviet design, where the tank became part of the glider, the Japanese tank hung below like a bomb on a rack. Upon landing, the glider would release the tankette, which would drive away into combat. The Ku-6 faced identical problems: underpowered tug aircraft, enormous drag, impractical logistics. It never saw operational use either. Two nations, two flying tank concepts, both abandoned for the same reasons. The British and Americans, meanwhile, pursued a different path entirely. They built larger conventional gliders. The British Hamilcar could carry a light tank inside its fuselage. The American CG-4 could transport a jeep or light artillery. These were practical solutions. Ugly perhaps, but they worked. They did not require the tank itself to become airworthy. They did not push engineering into the realm of absurdity. During the invasion of Normandy, British Hamilcar gliders delivered Tetrarch light tanks directly onto French soil. They were not flying tanks. They were tanks being carried by aircraft. A subtle but crucial distinction. The gliders landed, the tanks rolled out the nose, and they drove into battle. No experimental wings, no improvised flight controls, just brute force logistics. This was the path that worked, the path of conventional thinking applied with overwhelming force. The A-40 represented the opposite philosophy. Elegant innovation applied to an inelegant problem. After the war, the single A-40 prototype disappeared. Some records suggest it was scrapped for materials during the desperate defense of Moscow. Others indicate it may have survived into the late 1940s before being dismantled. No photographs of it in flight exist. Only diagrams and technical documents remain, scattered through Russian aviation archives. Antonov himself went on to legendary success. His design bureau would create some of the most successful transport aircraft in history. The An-2 biplane, the An-12 military transport, the massive An-124 Ruslan, and the An-225 Mriya, the largest aircraft ever built. Giants of the sky that carried tanks inside their cargo holds, not strapped beneath experimental wings. But Antonov never forgot his flying tank. In private correspondence, he defended the concept. The engineering was sound, he insisted. The execution had been rushed. Given more time, better materials, more powerful aircraft, it could have worked. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps in an alternate history with unlimited resources and no desperate war, the flying tank could have been perfected. But history is not written by what could have been. It is written by what was. The Antonov A-40 remains one of the strangest weapons ever tested, a solution so radical that even a nation fighting for its existence could not justify pursuing it. Too complex, too resource-intensive, too much engineering brilliance applied to a problem that had simpler answers. It flew once. It worked once. And then it vanished into the footnotes of military history, remembered only by those who seek out the forgotten, the abandoned, and the magnificently impractical. A 7-ton tank that soared through the sky for 2 brief minutes, then disappeared forever. If you want to discover more weapons that almost changed warfare, more machines that history left behind, subscribe now. The forgotten are waiting to be remembered.